You're calling from a 404 area code. Who are you? Where are you calling from?
Hello, I think, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. What's on your mind?
Hey, it's Josh from Atlanta again, and I was reading a Fox article that was looking at margins of victory for candidates in some of the states that were important this time.
Mm-hmm.
And they were looking at how candidates who were running on economic populism, and some of them were actually doing worse compared to Hillary's like margin of victory.
Mm-hmm.
So, like for instance, Evan Bayh, who is basically terrible from a progressive standpoint, actually he lost, but he did better than Hillary did in Indiana.
I would put
And
I would put Evan Bayh a very big asterisk next to Evan Bayh because Evan Bayh is already. I mean, his father was a senator. He already was a senator. I think he was also a governor. So he's an Indiana political institution, and his outperforming Hillary Clinton in Indiana is going to have very little to do with the specifics of his platform one way or another. So I think with Russ Feingold's performance in Wisconsin is much more disturbing to me. That's something I would want to look into. But Evan Bayh is not a good
yeah, that's
example for either side of that argument because he's just a political dynasty candidate who has universal name recognition. And I also would not find it hard to imagine that some people, some of that sort of universal name recognition might not all be positive, and there might be some sense of him as you know it's not just that he's more to the right on policy issues. He's really is just sort of a lobbyist. I mean, he's almost like it's like the old joke. Like, I mean, Evan Bayh's like a credit default swap come to life. There's like nothing to him. But I mean, if there were other examples behind that, I haven't looked at the article. I think the argument for me from economic populism is twofold. I mean, one, again, and we'd have to go state by state and see really how that broke down. But I mean, one is that first of all, it's the right thing to do, and it's the only durable thing to do. Like, I don't see how a policy platform is really built on center right economics and social liberalism. That is not a durable strategy for the Democratic Party outside of very specific parts of the country. And then number two, it's not the policy I advocate for. And I do think that the more these things are delivered on, they will pay electoral dividends. Um,
yeah,
I
sure,
find it
sure.
really, I also don't know if the numbers they're just taking is this person ran a populist campaign and they didn't perform so well. There's a lot of variables you're not
Like,
including.
did the top of the ticket just ignore that state?
Yeah, or does this person, are they bad on TV? Or do they have a small scandal that you've never heard of? Are people sick of hearing from them? I mean, those are very, and because I can just as easily come up with a number of generic polls and say like over 70% of voters want a minimum wage increase, and you know X number of people want banking reform, and if you give them individual pieces on healthcare, not as one package, their views on healthcare are quite left wing, and nobody wants Social Security and Medicare touched. So if you kind of pull out the sort of core economic left issues, they always poll very well. So I'm very suspicious of those kind of pieces. I would be suspicious, honestly, in the other way, even though it would more conform with my worldview, because there's just so many variables you can't take in there. And I also don't even know how they're defining economically populist.
And the top of the ticket didn't turn out the people who would respond to that.
Right. That's exactly right. So yeah, and yeah, because that's a really good point, because that assumes such a high level of like, the average voter is not someone who's like, I'm not so jazzed about Hillary's plans on banks, and I don't like her history at Wall Street, but I do know that the person who's running for Congress in my district is significantly more progressive. I mean, the reality is it's like me. I'll be firsthand on this. I went in to vote in New York, and I was totally ashamed of myself. I mean, I do this for a living. I don't know what the local judge I'm voting for. I don't know her policy platform. I don't know what Democratic club she's part of. most people who are voting like that have exactly the same experience across the board. So it sounds very Vox to me. It's very clever. It's very alluring, but it doesn't necessarily say much.
I'm pretty sure the Democratic voters this time around were higher income than they had been for Obama too. So I mean, all these things sort of. I think actually, be careful when people frame it that way because there's a lot to untangle there.
Yeah, that sounds like a real well, actually, column that leads to nothing. But I will look at it if you send it or tweet.
Hey, it's Sam Seder. Why don't you subscribe to this channel? You can do so right over here. Subscribe.